The jungle had a way of swallowing sound, turning even the loudest moments into something distant and unreal. But that night, the silence was different, heavy, thick. It crept through the treetops and pulled along the ground like fog, settling into the spaces where gunfire and shouting had echoed only minutes before. The young U.S. Marine pressed his back against the base of a tree, chest heaving, ears ringing so hard that he couldn't tell whether the quiet outside was real or just the aftermath of the ambush. His squad had been on patrol, a routine sweep, the kind they had done dozens of times, the kind that made even seasoned soldiers lower their guard without realizing it. Then the jungle erupted. Gunfire shredded the darkness, the shouting of his squadmates, orders, warnings, curses, all blurred together in a frantic storm of noise and movement. A flash grenade burst near his feet, enough to blind him and knock him off balance. By the time he scrambled behind a fallen log, half the squad had already scattered into the trees, each man diving for whatever cover he could find. And then the enemy came. He remembered crawling, mud sticking to his elbows and knees, leaves slicing his skin as he pulled himself deeper into the undergrowth. He remembered seeing silhouettes moving through the smoke, rifles raised, voices sharp and commanding. He held his breath, waiting for the moment a flashlight beam would land on his face, waiting for the metallic click of a rifle pointed toward his head. But no one saw him. Minutes dragged into hours. The firefight died down. The voices faded. The jungle returned to its quiet, the kind of quiet that felt more like holding its breath than resting. When dawn broke, pale light filtering through the canopy, he realized he hadn't heard a single familiar voice. No footsteps from his squad, no radio crackle, no distant gunshot signaling someone else had gotten away. It was just him, alone, disoriented, and deep behind enemy lines. He wiped mud from his face, trying to calm the tremor in his hands. Training told him to stay put and wait. Survival instinct told him to move. Fear told him to run until his lungs gave out. In the end, he chose to walk, slowly, quietly, toward the only sign of life he could see. A thin column of smoke rising above the trees, the unmistakable sign of a village. He didn't know if the people there would help him, ignore him, or turn him in. But he had nothing left. No map, no squad, no plan. Just a desperate hope that someone, anyone, might show mercy. And so he stepped toward the smoke, not knowing he was walking into a moment that would change the next 49 years of his life. The path leading down to the village twisted through bamboo clusters and patches of wild grass, each step sending a quiet crackle of leaves under the Marine's boots. His uniform was streaked with mud, one sleeve torn from crawling through the brush. He kept his head low, his senses sharp, listening for anything. A shout, the clatter of weapons, the snap of a twig that didn't belong. But the only sounds were the soft rustling of the morning breeze and the rhythmic clack of women's knives chopping vegetables somewhere in the distance. When the trees opened, he saw it. A small rural settlement nestled in a valley, smoke drifting lazily from tin chimneys, chickens darting between homes built of wood, bamboo, and corrugated metal. An ordinary village, but nothing was ordinary when you were a foreign soldier walking alone behind enemy lines. He knew the risks. Anyone who spotted him could report him. Some villagers were sympathetic to American troops. Others, by choice or by force, supported the other side, and some simply feared involvement and would turn him in for their own safety. But he also knew he couldn't survive in the jungle alone. He needed water, shelter, and help, even if help might come at a cost. He crouched behind a cluster of banana trees, observing quietly. A group of children played with a homemade ball near a water trough. A woman scrubbed clothes in a basin. A farmer led a water buffalo along a narrow path. It looked peaceful, deceptively so, like the war outside its borders didn't exist. Then, without warning, a small figure spotted him. A boy, maybe 10 years old, froze mid-step, the ball dropping from his hands. His eyes locked on the Marine's mud-covered face. The Marine raised a finger to his lips, pleading for silence without speaking a word. Before either of them could move, an older woman approached, calling out to the child. The boy didn't answer, he simply pointed. The woman followed his finger. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened for just a moment, fear, disbelief, recognition, and then softened into something unexpected, pity. Slowly, almost cautiously, she walked toward the Marine. He tensed, ready to run, but her hands lifted gently, palms forward, signaling calm. She scanned the tree line, checking if he had been followed. Then she gestured for him to duck lower, motioning frantically toward a nearby house. The Marine hesitated only a second. She gestured again. Come, follow. And with that, he stepped out of the brush and into the trust of complete strangers. Strangers who, in helping him, risked their own lives more than he could ever understand. He didn't know it yet, but these villagers were about to make a choice that would echo across decades. The house the woman led him to stood near the very edge of the village, a modest structure raised on wooden stilts, like so many homes scattered across rural Vietnam. Its bamboo walls rattled softly in the breeze, and beneath it, a dark crawl space stretched into a narrow cavern of shadow. The air there carried the scent of damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faint musk of old tools that had long been abandoned for higher, drier ground. The woman paused, just outside the doorway, her breath unsteady, her eyes scanning the tree line as though expecting soldiers to burst through at any moment. The boy from earlier hovered beside her, gripping her sleeve with trembling fingers. His earlier curiosity had been replaced by fear as the reality of the situation settled in. A foreign soldier, alone and hunted, standing just steps from their home. Another figure hurried toward them, a thin, weathered man with a woven hat slung over his back and mud clinging to his calves. His shirt was stained from farm work, the marks of a long morning in the rice paddies. The Marine recognized authority in his posture, a quiet leadership that didn't need translation. Two more villagers drifted closer, drawn by whispers that moved through the air like smoke. The Marine could make out only fragments of their conversation, clipped syllables, quick exchanges, sharp breaths. But he didn't need the language. He felt the tension, like a pulse, under the surface of the earth. They were weighing everything in real time. Was helping him worth the risk? Would soldiers come searching? Would their children be punished? Would the entire village be blamed? He had known fear before. On patrol, in ambushes, in those frantic seconds when bullets snapped past his ears, but this fear was different. This time, he wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for them. The old man finally exhaled, a long, resigned breath that seemed to carry the weight of a decision made many times before in quieter, simpler circumstances. He gave a single nod. The woman pointed toward the narrow gap beneath the house, a sliver of darkness barely tall enough for a dog to crawl through, let alone a grown man. Hide. Now. The Marine moved. There was no hesitation left in him. He dropped to his belly, pressing his palms into the cool earth as he slid into the crawl space. His elbows scraped on wooden beams, the packed soil pressed cold and unforgiving against his chest. A spiderweb brushed across his face as he squirmed deeper, pushing himself far into the shadowy corner where the stilts met the ground. He turned back just as the woman knelt beside the opening. Her hands appeared, offering a clay cup of water and a small folded cloth containing sticky rice. He reached for them with shaking hands. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely more than breath. He didn't know if she understood the words, but she nodded anyway, her expression gentle, steady, resolute. And then the floorboards slid back into place. Darkness wrapped around him, thick and complete. Above him, the world continued as though nothing had changed. Footsteps creaked softly across the wooden planks. Voices murmured, low, careful, deliberate. The cry of a baby drifted from somewhere nearby, followed by the muffled sound of a ladle striking the inside of a pot. The Marine lay perfectly still, every muscle wound tight as wire. His neck bent awkwardly against a beam, his legs curled into a space too small to stretch, his cheek pressed to the dirt. He could barely lift his head, but he could hear everything, every footstep, every whisper, every breath. Time dragged. An hour passed, then 2. At some point, he lost track entirely. More villagers came and went, their voices sharper now, thick with urgency. The rhythm of the village had changed, but it was too quiet, too tense. Word had spread. Soldiers were searching the area for any surviving Americans from the earlier firefight. His blood ran cold. When the boots arrived, he knew instantly they weren't American. The cadence was different, deliberate, coordinated, echoing with the authority of men who believed they controlled this territory. The heavy stomp of their arrival sent vibrations through the floorboards, each one rattling dust loose above his face. The first soldier stepped directly above him. A sprinkle of dirt drifted down onto the Marine's cheeks. He froze, forcing himself not to inhale sharply. Another soldier leaned his rifle against the wall, the metal clinking in a way that seemed unbearably loud inside the cramped space. A third moved slowly, tapping at the boards with the toe of his boot, seeking weaknesses, loose planks, anything unusual. The Marine felt his heartbeat slam against the packed soil beneath him. If the soldier kicked just a little harder, if he pried up the wrong board, if anyone's voice above cracked under fear, he would be found. And the villagers, this quiet family who had chosen kindness over caution, would suffer for their compassion. But something remarkable happened. The villagers did not waver. Their movements remained slow and ordinary, their voices held steady. The woman poured water for the soldiers, the old man answered their questions with the ease of someone discussing crops or weather. No trembling, no nervous glances at the floor, no sign of a secret hidden in the shadows, just inches beneath their feet. The soldiers searched. They questioned. They lingered. And then, miraculously, they left. The fading footsteps were like a slow release of pressure, the tension in the walls finally loosening. The village exhaled as one. And under the floorboards, so did he, for the first time in hours. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the cool earth. He was safe, for now. Above him, he heard the soft return of whispered voices, not panicked this time, but thoughtful, somber. They spoke with a new tone, one he could recognize even without understanding the words. The decision had been made. They would continue to hide him, not just for a moment, not just until danger passed, for a night, for as long as it took, whatever the cost. And with that, the Marine understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. These villagers, strangers in every way except humanity, had just risked everything for him. And he had no way to repay them. Not then, not yet, not ever fully. But one day, he promised himself he would try. The next morning, the Marine awoke to the sound of sweeping above his head, the soft, steady scrape of a broom moving rhythmically across wooden planks. The noise drifted down like a gentle reminder that the world was still turning, even if his own had stopped days ago. Light filtered through the thin cracks in the floorboards, tracing pale, shifting lines across the dirt beside him. He blinked, feeling the familiar sting behind his eyes, the stiffness in his neck, the ache in his legs. Every joint felt like it had been carved from stone after so long spent curled in a space not meant for a human body. But he was alive, and he was not alone. A bare foot appeared in the sliver of light beside the boards, followed by a soft rustle of fabric. Slowly, carefully, one of the planks lifted just an inch, just enough for the woman from the day before to push a small bowl through the gap. Rice again. A few slices of banana. A cup of tea still warm, steam curling faintly from its surface. She whispered a single word in English, barely above breath. "Eat!" Then the board lowered, returning him to darkness. Throughout the day, the pattern continued, delicate as a heartbeat. Soft footsteps, brief murmurs, the scent of food slipping into the crawl space only when it was safe. Sometimes it was the woman, sometimes the boy, his movements quick, nervous, but determined. Once the old farmer crouched low, slid in a piece of dried fish, and left it without a sound. The Marine never saw their faces clearly. Just hands, just silhouettes, just the quiet insistence that he survive. Outside, the village moved at a cautious rhythm. Children were kept indoors. Men spoke in low voices. Chickens clucked softly in the yards, but no one laughed, no one lingered, no one took unnecessary risks. The Marine could hear it all. Footsteps crunching the dry earth, hushed conversations, the shifting of tools and baskets. And always beneath it all, the weight of fear pressing down on every moment. But at night, the village transformed again. Men gathered by the house, smoking and speaking about the patrols, their voices carrying through the thin walls. The Marine couldn't understand their words, but tone needed no translation. Every sentence was shaped by caution. Every silence was purposeful. They were deciding whether to move him, whether to wait, whether the danger was increasing. He realized something then, something that hit him deeper than fear or hunger. They weren't just hiding him, they were guarding him. On the third night, the floorboard lifted and the boy's small hand slid through a stub of a candle. The Marine shook his head, too dangerous, too visible, but the boy pushed it insistently until the Marine took it. He watched the boy's shadow retreat, then struck the match, shielding the flame with his palm. When the candle sparked to life, the little crawl space glowed with trembling orange light. For the first time in days, he truly saw where he had been living. The packed earth scraped smooth from years of storage. Cobwebs spread across the corners like delicate threads of silver. Old baskets and tools stacked nearby, and above him through the cracks, the silhouettes of the family moving. Slow, deliberate, careful. The candle lasted only an hour, but for that hour, he felt human again, not a shadow hiding beneath someone else's life. On the fifth day, he heard a sound that froze his blood. New voices outside, deep, harsh, commanding, the unmistakable cadence of soldiers. They questioned the villagers, stomping through the yards, slamming doors open. Boots approached the house again, heavy, purposeful, close enough that dust rained down from the boards above him. He held his breath so hard his ribs trembled. The villagers answered the soldiers with perfect calm. Their lies were gentle, ordinary. They spoke of crops, of broken tools, of sickness in the fields. Nothing more, nothing less. Their voices didn't waver. Their eyes never flicked downward, not once. When the last bootstep faded and the silence settled like a returning heartbeat, the floorboard lifted. The boy's face didn't appear, but his whisper came soft and certain. Safe. That one word, so small, so quietly spoken, nearly broke the Marine's composure. He pressed his hands to his face, shaking, swallowing the emotion that rose like a flood. By now, he understood the truth with painful clarity. These people were risking everything, their home, their village, their lives, not because they expected anything in return, not because they owed him anything, but because he was a young man far from home, frightened and alone. Because kindness, even in war, found a way to live. The days stretched on, each one marked by the same ritual. Food passed through the boards, silence maintained, danger endured without complaint. Every gesture, every whisper, every bowl of rice felt like another thread binding him to these strangers in a way he could never repay. And with every passing hour, the Marine's gratitude grew heavier, a weight he knew would stay with him for the rest of his life. All he could think was, if I survive this, I will never forget them. Never. What he didn't know was that never would stretch across 49 years. For years after the war, the Marine tried to move forward with his life. He built a career, raised a family, and learned to navigate the quiet routines that replaced the chaos of combat. Outwardly, he looked like any other veteran who made it home and found a way to keep going. But privately, a single memory lived inside him with a weight that never faded. He often thought back to that dark room under the floorboards, the muffled footsteps above him, the whispered voices, the hands that passed him food in the shadows. He remembered the fear he carried, the fear he still saw in the eyes of the villagers, and the moment he realized they were risking their own lives simply to protect his. These were ordinary people who owed him nothing, and yet they had chosen compassion over safety. Through the years, whenever the war resurfaced in his thoughts, a sudden sound, a news broadcast, a quiet night when sleep felt far away, he wondered what had happened to them. Did they survive the war? Did they ever know he made it home? Did they regret helping him, or did they remember him at all? He kept these questions to himself. They were too heavy, too tangled in guilt and gratitude to share casually. But the feeling never left. He carried it through every milestone: the birth of his children, the celebrations, the victories, the long stretches of normal life that the villagers never got to see. Their courage had given him decades he might never have had. Years of ordinary, beautiful moments he owed to the people who had hidden him from danger in a time when danger was everywhere. Occasionally, he imagined returning to Vietnam. He pictured stepping onto the same dirt paths, seeing the same cluster of houses, hearing the river that once carried the sounds of war. But year after year passed, and he told himself the opportunity was gone, that too much time had passed, that no one would remember him. Maybe the village no longer existed. Maybe it was better to let the past rest. But deep down, the promise he felt, Maman, the need to say thank you, never disappeared. It sat quietly inside him, waiting for the right moment, waiting for courage, waiting for the day he would stop wondering and finally return to the place where strangers had saved his life. And after 49 long years, that day was about to come. 49 years after he escaped that village, the Marine finally decided it was time. Time to stop wondering. Time to stop carrying unanswered questions. Time to return to the place where strangers had risked everything for him. He booked a ticket to Vietnam without telling many people. Even as he packed, he wasn't sure what he expected to find, or if he would find anything at all. The village might have changed beyond recognition. The people he remembered could be gone. The house that had hidden him might no longer exist. But something inside him insisted that he had to go anyway. When he arrived, Vietnam felt both familiar and impossibly new. The roads were smoother, the towns busier, the fields dotted with modern homes instead of wooden huts. As he traveled deeper into the countryside, he began to notice small hints of the past. The rivers that hadn't changed, the silhouettes of mountains that still watched silently over the land. His guide led him toward the rural district where he believed the village had once stood. The air grew quieter, the roads narrower, until they reached a community of simple homes and dirt paths. Children ran through the fields the same way they had decades ago. Elders sat in the shade watching the day pass just as their parents once had. He stepped out of the car slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Memory and reality blurred. He searched the faces of the villagers, looking for any trace of the people who had saved him. He held an old photograph in his hands, one he had drawn himself after the war, trying to capture the faces he couldn't bear to forget. As he walked deeper into the village, the past came rushing toward him with every footstep. He wasn't sure what he'd find, or if he would be welcomed. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was finally home to finish what fear and time had left undone. It didn't happen quickly. The Marine spent hours speaking with villagers, showing his sketch, describing the night he hid under their floorboards. Some remembered the war clearly. Others only knew the stories told by their parents and grandparents. Faces blurred into names, and names into possibilities. Then an elderly woman stepped forward. She studied his drawing carefully, her eyes softening as recognition sparked. She pointed to a small house at the far edge of the village, a home standing on the same ground where the old one had once been built. She said that her brother, her cousins, and several neighbors had helped protect an American soldier during the war. Some of them had passed away, but others were still alive, and they lived just steps from where they once risked their lives. The Marine felt his breath catch. With slow, deliberate steps, he followed her through the village. Each yard they passed felt like a memory waking up. Chickens scattered. Children stared curiously. A warm wind carried the quiet rustle of rice fields. And then they arrived. Outside the house stood two elderly villagers, a man and a woman, their posture slightly bent with age, but their eyes bright with awareness. They studied him for a long moment, uncertain but curious. The guide explained who he was, explained what happened, explained that this was the Marine who had hidden in the darkness of their floorboards nearly 5 decades earlier. The couple exchanged a look, a long, quiet look. And then the man stepped forward. He placed a trembling hand over his heart and nodded. They remembered. And in that instant, everything the Marine had carried for 49 years, The gratitude, the guilt, the questions, the fear that he had waited too long finally began to ease. The sun was beginning to set when the Marine finally stood before the families of the people who had saved him. The small group gathered in the open yard felt both familiar and impossibly distant. The children now adults, the adults now elderly. The faces changed by time but carrying the same quiet strength he remembered through the floorboards all those years ago. He didn't give a speech. He didn't know how. Instead, he simply bowed his head and let the words come out softly, almost trembling. "Thank you for my life." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the older villagers stepped forward, a man who had been just a teenager during the war. He placed a hand on the Marine's shoulder and said through the interpreter, "We did what any family would do. You were alone. You were in danger. We only did what was right." But the Marine shook his head gently. "You didn't have to," he whispered. "That's why I never forgot." He handed them small gifts he had brought from home. Nothing grand, nothing meant to repay the unrepayable. Just tokens of gratitude from a man who had carried their kindness for almost 50 years. They accepted them not as repayment, but as acknowledgement of a bond they never expected to matter so deeply. They invited him into their home, not the same one that once sheltered him, but a rebuilt version standing on the same patch of earth. They served him tea. They laughed. They shared pieces of their memories, fragments of the past that had survived the war the way they themselves had survived it, quietly, humbly, without bitterness. And as he sat among them, the Marine felt something he hadn't felt since those days under the floorboards. Safety. Not the kind carried by weapons or soldiers, but the kind carried by human hearts. He realized then that gratitude doesn't expire with time. Courage doesn't fade. And kindness, the kind given with risk, with fear, with nothing to gain, can echo through an entire lifetime. When he finally stood to leave, the villagers walked him to the road. No one cried, yet the moment carried its own unmistakable weight. They waved goodbye not as strangers, not even as old acquaintances, but as people whose lives had once crossed in the unlikeliest of circumstances and remained quietly bound ever since. Nearly half a century had passed, but at last he had said the words he had carried for so long, and they had heard him.